Welcome back. It's been a bit,
Yes, it has.
but we are here and we're ready to get off the wire. I am a man of no qualifications. This is my beautiful, loving mother, who is a master's of library science, and we're here to do what we do best.
Talk about stuff.
Specifically with the newspapers,
Yes.
I think
So before we got started, I was flipping through my papers and he was like,
you brought a textbook today.
and I just kind of looked at him like, didn't you research?
I've got stuff. I just did not bring the last 20 years of newspaper with me here today.
So see, this is the difference. A librarian, I have to research forever.
Well,
And he's a dude.
I'm just a guy. I can't be held to the same standards as you.
So I chose to research 100 years ago. I thought that it'd be really neat because we are at the end of 2022
Mhm.
to look back at 1922 and see what they were talking about.
Well, from what we know offhand, immediately, that was a pretty okay time in America
I could tell that by the newspapers.
because World War I just ended in like 1918 or something like that. And this was pre-Great Depression.
Yes.
So the Roaring Twenties, as it was affectionately known, so especially the early part of that decade.
Right.
If you're searching 1922, it sounds like you might have heard about a party or two. I don't know. I don't know what you found
You're gonna get
specifically,
ready to
but
find out.
You're the one with the textbook, so you can go first.
You want me to go first?
Let me hear what was going on in the year 1922.
So you know how in today's world we have people who sue corporations just to sue corporations.
I'm not going to act like a corporation's never deserved to be sued before, but
Well,
sure, yeah.
this happened in 1922 and it was a big deal, and I can see how it would have changed laws and rules going forward. So this says child dies, Glasgow to pay. So Glasgow Corporation was a corporation that has after several years, there's a nice little history into these botanical gardens that I researched back to like the early 1800s. And these botanical gardens were right next to a playground. And so this corporation with this university, they were growing different kind of plants for their botany program, medicinal purposes, right? Well, unfortunately, this 7-year-old boy who was playing at the playground, there was a gate that you could just go into these public botanical gardens, and they had a poisonous plant in this wonderful little beautiful botanic gardens with berries on it that were beautiful and they were attractive, and this toxic plant was not fenced in, and this boy died hours after eating the berries of the deadly plant called Atropa belladonna. And his mom and dad decided to sue the Glasgow Corporation for having this plant next to a playground in a public garden. And so it says here were the two issues raised in the case. Was the corporation failing in its duty to uphold the care of its public gardens visitors?
Absolutely.
And it wanted to say, was the duty of care held to a much higher level because a child was involved?
I think if you have a public place, very obviously public, and it doesn't even have to be kid-focused, right?
Which this wasn't.
But it was next to a playground,
Next
which
to a playground.
makes it kid-focused.
Right.
A public area next to a playground is a kid place. Have you ever been to like any kid place and then the area all around
Well, they
it?
tried to say, oh, well, there was a fence and a gate.
An unlocked gate.
An unlocked gate.
With a sign that says public. Kid's like, this is for me. He
7-year-old.
goes in there and he's like, berries!
Exactly.
I love berries!
They were attractive berries
Yes.
too, as the court case says.
I'm not going to act like at the age of 7 I would not have eaten the berries.
Right?
That's all I'm saying. Is if I'm at the playground I'm evaluating the surroundings, right? And I'm done playing, I'm done playing tag for the day, and now I'm just like, all right,
I'm gonna get some berries.
I just destroyed everyone at the game of tag because I was the best seventh grader on the playground.
course
I
you
was the
were.
fastest.
Yes,
I had the
yes.
good shoes.
Yeah, you did. The Puma shoes.
Yes, so I was the fastest. All the ladies knew it. 7-year-old me is exhausted from absolutely destroying everyone
You've
at
gotta
tag.
rehydrate.
So I am out just looking around, find a nice botanical garden.
Yep.
I'm trying to rest and recover,
Yes.
and I'm seeing berries. Berries are good for you. Mom says berries are good for you.
The berries look similar to grapes, and anybody might be easily misled. The harm was predictable,
Yes.
and the firm
Yes.
did nothing to stop it from occurring.
I agree with this.
So but what it ended up talking about was what is really public grounds? What does that really mean?
Yeah.
And so if you have a yard and you have poisonous berries in your yard, it's your personal yard, kids walk by, are you liable if they come onto your property and eat? And I'm not saying that, it is or isn't. But that's Glasgow was found liable, but it had 2 appeals that it went through, and it went to trial. It says the only reason that they were convicted was because it said there should have been some notice of alert to the public about the berries to prevent them from eating it.
It's a public space, and I don't think any normal human being is planting a poisonous berry in general, so that's a bad argument.
I get that. I get that.
But unless it was intentionally mallet. Like, why do you need poison berries? Because I want my neighbor's kid to come here and eat them. What do you think this is?
Well, some of us might.
Like, the idea that you're planting something that's deadly, and it's a public space, I would be concerned of adults eating it. You know what I mean? Let alone kids.
Absolutely.
So it's like, why is there not even a sign in front of the plant that says, this is a poisonous berry.
Well, because
do not eat it.
How did an adult not die before then? Did they maybe only eat one and it's not as that toxic to an adult or something? I don't know.
It just seems strange
to
me.
But what I also found out was
garden.
I wanted to find out what the settlement was, right? I wanted to know how much the Taylors got, but I couldn't find it anywhere. Couldn't find the settlement anywhere. But what I did find is that this Glasgow corporation, and this is what I love about researching this old stuff, I found out that this Glasgow corporation has been under more than one investigation and death, and it's interesting that is this corporation just kind of cursed? Do we have bad business practices? I don't know, but Glasgow Corporation has had several.
Yeah, that's normally not a surprising thing. Most corporations are not known for being great people.
No. But 7-year-old boy, and of course the corporation took it to 2 appeals before going to a trial, and it took years.
Yeah.
So it says we can conclude that the defendants were aware of this danger caused by the poisonous berries and did nothing to prevent the damage. So we say that the defendants had the knowledge of risk, and they also owed a duty of care to the child, but still they did not put any notice or warning regarding the harmful nature of the berries, and as a result, the child suffered, and they were held liable for tort of negligence.
Wow.
So that was my beginning to our start today with my extra research.
Well, I think I can follow it up. I'm going to go straight into my big story then, because that's a scandal that you were just talking about. And I have another scandal. I'm reading from the Indianapolis paper. It's an Indianapolis paper. There's like 5 of them. I forget which one exactly I pulled from, but it's December of 1903. I want to say it was like December 3rd.
Okay.
And I have another story later from it. But the big one is a water scandal in Grand Rapids, Michigan. So
Michigan's been struggling with water issues for years.
It doesn't make sense. They have that giant, big lakes, and they just can't figure out water.
Figure out water up there.
So, at the turn of the century, 1800 or from the 19th to the 20th century, they pushed for a new source of fresh water in Grand Rapids. And 2 years later, in the year 1900, the city's Common Council, its legislative body, took concrete steps towards securing a new water supply. They wanted to build a pipeline from Lake Michigan to Grand Rapids. roughly 40 miles of pipe. It became the choice of many of the city's leadership, despite the millions of dollars necessary to complete the project. And by October of 1900, the city's common council seemed ready to award the contract to build a pipeline to one of two bids. To demonstrate the ability to build the multi-million-dollar water system, the bids submitted checks for $100,000 to prove that they had the money to at least start the project.
Without the city's help.
Without the city's help.
Okay.
Yeah. At the meeting, George Perry, dramatically revealed that both bids were forgeries.
What?
Despite the dramatic news, city leaders decided to simply reopen the bidding process. Phony bids were just part of this process. So the two companies that were bidding to build this pipeline were like, hey, we're good for the money. Here's a check that we have. And then this guy at the meeting's like, both of these are fake.
What?
And they're like, whoops. Whoops.
So this is how we get to states
and then
having a list of approved bidders because of this.
Yes. And then they were just like, all right, I guess we have to reopen the bids.
You think?
So before the city could award the contract, more shadowy actions came to light. In February of 1901, Chicago police arrested city attorney Lance Salisbury for stealing $50,000. The money was allegedly for Salisbury to bribe politicians and to secure the water contract. Speaking of Chicago,
as I just said,
they always find a way to be involved.
Chicago.
They found a way to be involved.
And by the way, we don't rehearse this ahead of time. I have no idea what his stories are, so the fact that that was where he was going, completely...
The money was allegedly to bribe politicians to secure the water contract through Cook County, though Cook County dropped the charges shortly after he returned the money. The foundation of the water scandal had been laid. Seeing a political opportunity, Grand Rapids Republicans ran a campaign touting their trustworthiness in juxtaposition to the Democratic Salisbury. While effective in adding a couple of Republican seats to the common council, the legislative body voted to retain Salisbury. So they were trying to vote him off, and they decided that they were going to do a vote on if he should stay on the board or not. After
they've been making good water decisions for a long time.
Well, this is just the board.
I know.
Just the politics of Grand Rapids.
It's been fantastic.
Being pretty great. So they did this vote, and the good thing about this guy who did research on this, Brian's Mackey, did a list of the people who voted for and against Salisbury, 12-12, so he got to stay. It was a tie.
Wow.
The funny thing is he includes all of the people who got paid. And on both sides, there were people who got paid because they voted on party lines, but people from both parties were getting paid off. So 8 of the 12 people that voted to keep him on the board had been paid off. And 5 of the 12 people that voted against him had been paid. 13 people of 24 were paid off on this board. Over half the board has been paid off, and they're only voting to get rid of one guy. It's.
What do you think about corruption?
It's nothing new.
No!
It is nothing new. 1903, and we have a huge scandal. It keeps going.
Uh-oh.
So when Salisbury, the scandal stayed small until 1903. I have the article from 1903. When Salisbury completed a sentence for federal banking violation and faced additional prison time for bribery. So he actually did face prison time, the guy who tried to bribe and use the money. Given limited operation, Salisbury became the prosecution's star witness. The legal system, however, struggled to implement many reform trials. It was hard to prosecute this kind of stuff early in America.
Oh, absolutely.
And there was a political cartoon that ran in 1901.
Of course there was.
And it was an art of Miss Grand Rapids, who's like their, like New York City has the Statue of Liberty. Miss Grand Rapids, which is their personification of their city.
Okay.
Standing at a fishing pond, and she has grand jury bait. And she said, I've had all kinds of bites, but this is the first time I've landed anything. Because there has been so much fraud and corruption in this city government, and this is the first time they have ever been able to get somebody to serve jail time, despite, again, 13 people on that board provably took bribes.
Yes.
One guy went to jail, and it was the guy who bribed them. Not the people who accepted the bribes either. They're all still serving, and it's just
They're
fine.
still serving their community.
So the political
come on.
cartoon, again, referencing the past instances of governmental corruption that had largely gone unpunished, the water scandal's initial grand jury was a major step toward progressive reform, and it was the first attempt in a long time to use the legal system to address municipal grief.
I truly think that everybody feels as though corruption in local elections and local councils is brand new.
Yeah, it's not.
No.
And the problem is you don't really hear about it. So even stuff that happens today, right? We talk about things that happen in city governments, county governments that were like, that doesn't seem right.
Correct.
Right? But unless somebody's going to jail, you're never going to hear about it.
Oh, no.
You're never going to find out about it or things that happen. So the only reason we even hear about this, and not the other things, because clearly there was a sentiment at the time of, wow, corruption in Grand Rapids, shocker, right? Like, they were clearly not shocked at all. But because this actually resulted in somebody going to jail, at least one person.
It hit the news.
It finally hit the news, and
hit
everyone's
the
like,
wire.
wow, look at this.
Hit the wire.
So 5 years after the water scandal emerged, the prosecution no longer believed they could convict anybody. The water scandal ended quietly because they dropped all of the open cases, except for obviously the 2 that they actually got convictions. So they convicted 1 person, I think maybe 2. Everyone else got off the hook for taking bribes, giving bribes.
I feel like politicians can really get away with stuff these days, just like they did back in the 1800s.
They've
the 1900s.
been getting away with things, and I would argue that today it's a bit harder for them to get away from things. But it was clearly something that was so common at the time where it's hitting news. I've got a list here. This is the list.
Do tell.
Paper, Indianapolis, 1903, front page.
Wow.
Of the Indianapolis paper. I've got a list of an ex-mayor. I've got all of these voters, all 13 voters by name, and how much money they received.
Really?
I've got it listed out here. It's printed in the paper.
They actually typed their names and the amount.
George R. Perry, ex-mayor, $13,000. At the time, by the way, today's money is 20 times more. So what's 20 times 1,300 or 13,000?
You're asking me a math question.
It's a lot of money. It's a lot of money, mother. Even these people who are listed for $500, that's 10 grand in today's money.
It is a lot of money.
So you have all of the voters on the board who got minimum $300, which is less than 10 grand, like 6 or 7 grand.
I think it's great that they published their names.
They published them by name, what their position was. You have a state senator in here who received money. You have a millionaire from New York who received money. You have, here's a good one. You have 2 state representatives, and you have the manager of the Grand Rapids Herald who received $16,000 to keep them out of the press for as long as possible. This is the Indianapolis paper.
So
they are not held to that agreement. And they are glad.
So how did you find this story?
I found the paper and I saw it on the front page. I just ran a paper. I looked at this paper because December, I wanted to find Christmas ads.
Oh, yes.
I was looking for Christmas advertisements on December papers. I just picked the biggest place, Indianapolis, right?
Right.
I look at the paper, front page, government fraud in Grand Rapids. What's going on here?
And you couldn't let that one go.
You have names on the front page. I'm looking up this story. I find an article written by this guy.
So we actually take these papers and then we research the stories. And
yes.
So because we are so interested, because the papers were like just these little blips.
They do little blips. Again, this is just listing, pretty much the only thing this story had was the bribe and then the bribe amounts and then like a little bit about what happened. And the fact that it was a water project, they got bribed for that. And then like one guy went to jail. And I'm looking up the story and now I'm finding, Grand Rapids is not that clean of a place right now. Lots of fraud going on in the government. But yes, you've got 2 state representatives, you've got a state senator, you've got an ex-mayor, you've got a newspaper general manager.
It was an all-encompassing
You've got
scandal.
some attorneys involved. You've got all of the voters on the city council, 13 of the 24, all involved in taking bribes from this one guy who was on the board.
Would you like to hear about another trial?
I would love to hear about more scandal and problems going on.
Airedale is on trial for cat slaughter.
Oh my.
Airedale is the owner of the dog named Dormy. Dormy the dog. A dog.
A dog is on trial, basically.
Yes.
For the murder of a cat.
So when I read this story, I had to go look and see, was this just somebody writing something for the paper? Because we've seen that.
We've seen the Bigfoot stories
yes.
in the paper.
Yes.
So you have to check to see if these are real cases that were inputted into a court.
So this is a real story. It happened in San Francisco. Airedale dog, alleged murder of Sunbeam and 13 other cats. And
he was on a kill streak.
He was. It was a
Ridiculous.
hard day for Marjorie, the owner of the late Sunbeam. Um, it was because Domini climbed underneath the hedge fence, and she came into the backyard and seized Sunbeam by the back of her fat neck. And after several vigorous shakes, the cat was no more.
Jeez.
I know, I know.
Come on.
Um, the identification was complete after Mrs. Ingalls passed up the Russian wolfhound and said, no, it wasn't that one. Because they had two other suspects, the
Yeah.
wolfhound
Yeah.
and the mastiff, and that wasn't the case. So here's a picture. I know you guys can't see it, but I'm gonna show Austin. Here's the picture of Domine, and here's his owner.
Yeah.
And so
I can tell you from the picture he did it.
oh, of course.
He did it. I can see that. That guy did it.
So he was on trial for killing 14 cats. The cat slaughter was a serious charge with alleged victims that included, of course, Sunbeam,
Yes.
a beloved Persian cat, and many other neighborhood felines. According to the prosecution, yes, there was a prosecution, Dormy slipped under the hedge fence, seized Sunbeam by the fat scruff of her neck, and shook the cat to death. And the owner of Sunbeam was forced to pick out the dog in a canine roundup. There were 3 of them. Those other 2 dogs. It was a canine roundup.
They did a
There was some
No.
suspicion. Yes, there was a
no
doggy
way.
roundup.
They did a lineup of dogs,
Yes.
and they had the. It was out.
Yes, they did. They did a roundup.
They did a lineup of dogs.
There was
No.
some suspicion that Dormy was targeted for trial because of his owner, Mr. Eaton McMillan, was a wealthy automobile dealer. And the dog's aristocratic background may have made him a target. The Chicago Tribune joked that Dormy's trial would expose the inner secrets of the upper strata of dogdom. Ultimately, it didn't matter. The trial ended with a hung jury, with 11 jurors voting to acquit, while only one wanted the dog to go to the pound gas chamber. So Dormy walked free. Oh, yes. So the trial was for Dormy's life.
The trial was to gas chamber the dog.
Yes, yes. So it said
No way.
the law was the result of a San Francisco ordinance that held both dog and master to be liable for any crimes the dog committed. The master could escape with a fine, but the dog would be tried for life. Though laws obviously vary significantly by location, but they aren't that different today. If an animal today destroys property, including other animals, it is usually easy to charge them and have them killed. It just probably won't go to a jury trial.
I love the idea of a jury trial for a dog's life. That is insane. That is so crazy.
It's happened before. A chimpanzee was tried for smoking in public.
Where was this?
I don't have that.
Where?
I don't have that. But and then there was an execution of a pig.
Well, that happens anyway. That's
Yeah, I know.
that was gonna
But
happen.
as you can
They
see, the pig is crying
Ugh.
in this Roman court. And so here's the thing. Parents are responsible for what their dogs do. This dog killed 14 cats.
Well, parents are responsible for what their kids do. We've seen that in court all the time.
That's what I wanted to bring up
In
today.
modern school shootings, parents have been held liable for their kids' actions.
But that's really just gotten started.
Yes, I haven't seen much of that.
I think that should be a thing.
Well, it seems like it is. I don't know all the legal precedent. We're not lawyers here, but
Nope.
I'm sure
we just read cases.
I think we just haven't seen those cases in the news that much when those things happen, and I think
Right.
we're only now seeing it because of the coverages of that a school shooting will receive,
Right.
and the outrage that generates. I think we see it because of that, and we're starting to see it more and more. But I bet that kind of precedent has existed for a while, and it's just been in cases where we would never see it because it would never hit the main news.
Because parents lose their kids because of negligent. I mean, the kid doesn't get killed,
Parents
but
do seem to
apparently the
be-
dog will get killed.
They won't kill your kid.
They will kill your dog.
They will kill your dog.
On that
I'm
note,
thinking it's crazy cat owners who got involved there. If I'm honest, if you took 14 cat owners and put them in a room, at least one of them is a psychopathic individual. Okay? So if your dog kills 14 cats, there is at least one who is definitely coming for you.
And that was Sunbeam's mom.
And that was Sunbeam's mom. And unfortunately, she lost the trial, but she took him there.
She took it all the way.
She took him to the stand.
She took him all the way.
Now, here's the question. Can a dog perjure himself? When they put him on the stand and they're asking the dog questions?
You know.
Is he allowed to lie on the stand because we can't understand him?
We can't understand. I don't know.
What does a dog trial look like? I'd like to call the witness. One, Sparky.
Sparky and Sunbeam.
Yeah, I don't know. But
on that note,
I would like to transition into Christmas because we are 2 weeks out.
Can you believe that?
It's the most wonderful time of the year.
Absolutely.
And I was looking for Christmas-y things in the paper.
Okay.
The first thing is the most American thing ever, and it's been going on, and it will continue to go on. It's an ad.
Capitalism.
A limited time offer. 10 cents a day.
No.
We'll bring you a genuine $22.50 Victor Victriola, which is like a record player.
Okay.
They are offering you financing.
For the 10 cents a day?
So for your music player, you can get it financed. And I want to...
Is this the early days of layaway?
So this was, if you do the math, it's a $400 record player in today's money.
Okay.
I don't know if that's great pricing. Seeing the things that you can buy today for $400, you know, like a gaming console, you look at like a VR headset, $400, right?
Right.
Just to play a record player that doesn't include records, right? I don't know. It seems a bit overpriced to me. 10 cents a day turns up to be like $2 a day, $3 a day.
Wow.
Or
a month.
A month, yeah, whatever. You end up paying $3 of this $22 back a month, which translates to $60 a month. Or a week.
What's the company that was doing this? Did you get the company's name? Because this reminds me of Rent to Own. Aaron's Rent to Own.
It's the Victor Victriola. I guess the Victor is the brand and the Victriola is the... But yeah, you can pay 10 cents a day, weekly or monthly payments as you prefer. And they are loving the idea of getting you in debt. And it's a thing that's been... It's upsetting to see because this was before credit cards. This was like the only way you could get in debt in this time period was like a bank, like getting a loan. That was the only way. A mortgage was pretty much like one of the few ways you could get in debt in America back then.
You know, it's probably better back then.
But nowadays,
you have to live within your means.
There has been a trend, and especially for targeted at Gen Z, you have Klarna. If you're buying on Amazon or anywhere online, Klarna and Afterpay and all of these people who are offering you buy now, pay later, or buy now, pay in 4. Even PayPal,
4 installments, yeah.
even PayPal will let you pay later on anything you buy.
Seems weird to me.
I spent like 30 minutes today trying to find all of the terms on what happens if I don't pay, right? What happens if I'm in debt? And they make it impossible to find. You know, I'm not aware of how predatory they are. But they make it very difficult for you to see the side effects of what you buy and how much that debt matters to you. And the worst part is, when you're using Klarna, Afterpay, and PayPal, you can use your credit card to pay off those things, get yourself in credit card debt, continue to use those things, then you're in debt to them, and you're in debt to your credit card, and you have a mortgage to pay, and you don't own anything.
Can you see how quickly it is for people to make very bad decisions?
Even back then, they were starting to realize, hey... Just 10 cents a day? You can afford 10 cents a day. Who can't afford 10 cents a day?
It's very predatory advertising, even back then.
It is very predatory advertising back then, but it just reminds me of, like, we're now in this Christmas shopping season, and I was watching a video of a guy talking about how Gen Z, despite being one of the poorest...
Yes, you are.
In terms of, like, financial status at the moment, because we're just now getting out of college, if we are, or we're getting jobs, working minimum wage, and we're doing all these things. We are spending some of the most money... compared to other generations at this moment, and a lot of that money is going on a credit card. It's going on Klarna. It's going on Afterpay. It's going on PayPal Pay Later.
It's and because we are getting all the debt because
we just want to buy it now, and we are the generation who has the most access to buy it now and put ourselves in debt for the rest of our lives.
Think of the longevity of that.
So it's very
concerning. It's kind of like a hoarder at the age of 22.
And
think of the longevity of that.
It's very disturbing to see that. You know, it is Christmas time, and we're going to see what happens after this season, how many people are in debt. I know our family's no stranger to debt and credit card debt and having to deal with it. And I know it's hard to go through a Christmas where your kids aren't getting the presents they want.
Right.
But I can tell you it would be even harder if they had to deal with you going through bankruptcy.
Right.
So, just something to keep in mind this holiday season, to keep it on a light note. Don't get yourself in crippling debt, because nowadays,
it's
we
just
can
the same.
find opportunities in 1903 where you could get yourself in debt. But today, it's never been easier, because not only can you get a Victor Victriola today
For 10 cents a day.
for 10 cents a day, you can go and buy anything on Amazon, anything at Walmart, and you can get yourself in debt twice to two different people. And you can go get a mortgage, and you can all of these things. And it's just it's not changed, and you can see the breadcrumbs of it starting 100 years ago.
It really makes you want to dive into that idea
Of how much more debt you can get yourself into today than you could 100 years ago.
How that even started. I think there's a story there. I might have to
Yeah,
look
well, the
into.
problem is even then, back in the day, it was less regulated. Today there's only so much debt you can get yourself in. There's legal limits. You can
Right.
declare bankruptcy. There's legal avenues to get out of debt.
But
It
what
results
happened
in
to cause those legal avenues? It's kind of like the Glasgow
It's because
case.
of people getting, it's like,
Uh-huh.
how do these precedents get handled and started? And it's because of how horrible the treatment was in the past. And, even today, it's like, if you get in that much debt, you're going to have to start over. You're going to lose everything, and you're going to have to start all over again. And back then, you might just get enslaved because, you could never get out of the debt, really. At least today, you get that opportunity to start over. But that's a horrible reality, is that the good thing about today is that, you can just start over completely and lose
right.
everything. And that's,
With a credit
at least you
score
can do
of
that.
300.
Yeah, good luck living your life like that.
Right.
At least you can't be enslaved in debt like you used to be able to. But some people would argue that low credit score and nothing might be not too far from that.
So how you and I are pretty close.
We certainly are.
There was this child and her mom who were very close.
I didn't think we were the only two.
You didn't?
I would love to hear about this other couple.
So I'm once again, as you know, I researched 1922, and I didn't tell everybody these were the Du Bois County Jasper paper that I looked at.
Okay.
It says fell 3 stories, child was uninjured.
You telling me we had a 3-story building in Du Bois County in
Somewhere.
1920? Because the tallest building
Nope.
in Du Bois County is still
Nope.
3 stories.
New York City,
Okay.
but it was in our paper.
Okay, it was in our paper, New York City.
So Anna McCafferty, 7 years old, of New York City, was busy hanging out her doll family's washing when she lost her balance and fell from a 3rd-floor fire escape 35 feet to the ground. Would you live to see the next day?
Probably not.
No.
The question is, why'd you push me?
So
What did I do that day?
So this is the part that I love. Her mother saw her disappear and she fainted. The mother fainted. I don't know, was fainting really real? Whenever they talk about women back then fainting, I just assumed that it wasn't real. But once again, when neighbors rushed in, they found Anna administering restoratives to her unconscious mother and explaining tearfully, "I ain't dead, Mummy. I hit the clothesline." Is that not a sweet story?
You are so lucky I lived. You are so lucky I lived, and you passed out? You passed out?
I passed out. But obviously you gave me restoratives.
Yeah, because
Do
you were
you
just
think
there.
that's
I'm like,
CPR?
Mom, I'm
Do you
fine.
think
I
that's you
caught
hitting
the
me in the
clothesline."
face? Or I mean, what is that?
It's up to the imagination. Up to the imagination. So speaking of Du Bois County,
Okay.
if you don't know, that's where we call home.
Yes.
Du Bois County. We're
Yes,
very
we do.
familiar with the area. Been there for a while. I found, so it's Christmas. What Christmas event is happening in Jasper at this time of year? Specifically a Christmas event. We know friends that work for this group of people that do this. We know the person who's in charge of all the acting for it. What?
The Polar Express?
The Polar Express happens during Christmas time in Jasper.
It's a big train.
It's a train that goes from Jasper to French Lick, and they do this big Polar Express thing. I've actually never been on it. We should go on it sometime.
Yes, we should.
But, they do stuff from the movie. They have a bunch of actors.
We've thought about you acting in it on occasion.
We have. But it's this cool thing that they do. I found 1903 is the paper still. New traction line, Vincent, West Baden, and Louisville Company Incorporated. They are building the rail line that runs from Vincennes to Petersburg to Oakland City to Huntingburg to Jasper to French Lick.
What?
So I found an article in the Indianapolis paper of them saying The Vincennes, West Baden, and Louisville Traction Company filed article incorporation from the Secretary of State. They're talking about how they got the land. They have $1.5 million, and they're going to build the rail from Vincennes all the way to French Lick, and then eventually they're going to connect it all to Louisville. And this will allow them to do more coal mining, Petersburg,
Right.
coal, all of the coal that's in southern Indiana, they're trying to get it to Louisville. So they're building a rail line from Vincennes through Jasper, through French Lick to Louisville. And the interesting part, this is the paper. They filed for incorporation in 1903. If you look, the rail was built in 1908.
Wow.
And then it was, eventually it got, decrepit, old, kind of out of condition. And then in the year 2000, the rail from Jasper to French Lick was reinstated. And that's when they did the whole revival of that rail line. But it's the same rail line that I found the paper talking about the incorporation of, the group that built it. And then that line technically still all exists today, just not in the same capacity as it was then.
We've had this conversation before, you and I, about rail versus trucks and what would have happened if the rail industry, with their passenger moving and commerce moving instead of all the highways and byways, what would life be
today? Yeah.
What would life be for us if rail had been expanded?
They talk about today, it's the big conversation around high-speed rail, and they want it going, across the country, everywhere. And it's an interesting conversation. It's just hard to imagine that now that we live in a place that's interstates and trucking.
Right, but I think
automobile.
Gen Z, you guys, you don't mind Ubers, you don't mind not driving, you don't mind all that stuff.
We are definitely more embracing towards public things, and we're willing to do, I'll have a random guy drive me somewhere. Yes. I'll get on the subway. I'll get on the, the public service if it's there and available to me. Yeah.
And
we're not
that's
too scared
just,
of that.
That's just one of those things that, I hadn't realized that it was that old. I mean, I'm sure that there was information about it.
1903 was when the financials were prepared for it, and it was built in 1908. And if you look up the rail map of Indiana, you can still kind of see how the lines connect, and then how that line goes from Huntingburg to Jasper to French Lick, and then how you can go from Huntingburg to Louisville, and then all the way you can go through Petersburg to Washington to Vincennes, all on that one rail. And this is the news story all about these people who are incorporating to put it together. And it is that same track that still exists. If you take the Polar Express from Jasper to French Lick, that is the rail that you were on. So that was my Christmas thing that I noticed. I was like, that's the Polar Express line. That's what still exists today, and that's what people still use it for.
So sometimes when you start looking at these stories, you get lost down a rabbit hole, and that's kind of what happened with this one that I found. Here's the headline: Men Students to Raise Child. That's one of those headlines that makes you want to know a whole lot more about it, right?
Men Students to Raise Child. Let's hear it.
Okay. The Home Economics Department of the University of Maine has temporarily adopted Frances Pauline, 4 months old. The 16 young men students of North Hall, in caring for the infant, will use the latest scientific methods. Little Frances is in perfect health and sleeps and takes nourishment on a well-defined schedule. Now, doesn't that make you go,
University, it's like one of those things where it's like, I want to meet one of those men that were involved. And because I've lived the college life.
Yes.
I've spent a year, I've spent 2 years living at Purdue, going to school and that kind of college dorm life with other men, doing activities, clubs, things like that. And I can see it. I can see it. I was on the hockey team. There were 20 dudes all united at this one purpose, right? So the idea that you could find 16 dudes and raise them, and they're like, we're going to do this the right way. And I can imagine that meeting, because I've had, we had board meetings for the hockey team, right? Because you have to. And I've been in those meetings, and we take those seriously. As seriously as 20 as college dudes can, right? But I can imagine us all sitting around this baby and being like, all right.
Who's feeding? Who's changing the diapers?
We got to get the finances together. We're going to get a budget together. We're all going to have to pay as much, because we budget for the hockey team. And I can imagine, okay, equipment, how much we're going to need for food. What food are we getting? Diapers. Who's taking care of them Monday through Wednesday? Who's doing the rest of the week? Well, I have class this day, so I can't do it that day. But if you can cover this day, I'll do. I can imagine this weird fraternity-like meeting where we just have a 14-month-old baby in the middle.
And you have
like,
this calendar on the wall, and you're all writing it in.
Yeah. And it almost sounds like a better way to take care of a baby.
Almost.
I can imagine it. 16 minds is greater than 2.
That is true. I just love the sleeps well and takes nourishment.
Yeah.
And we're going to use the latest scientific
I think you
method.
could make a movie out of that.
Oh, absolutely.
I would love to see. It makes me wonder if those people are still alive.
So
it's like
I went down a rabbit hole with this. I mean, I was looking up Little Frances.
Yeah.
And I truly believe that I found her obituary, but I'm not completely certain. But the dates kind of match up and everything. And the University of Maine actually had their newspapers scanned in. I was really impressed.
That's useful.
Yes, it was. We'll have to look at that on another date. Very, very well done.
Yeah.
And seeing some of that was really. But I was continuing to scan for this. You would have thought that this would have made it into their newspaper, right? Because as these are blurbs, it came off the wire.
Yeah.
Where's the primary source?
Where's the primary? Yeah.
And so I could not find the primary source in looking at this.
I'm sure
but
that
I think this is something that I would love to know more about.
Again, yeah, those are the kind of crazy stories that you want to hear more about. And you've talked about this kind of stuff with incorporating into libraries. Because we've started this podcast, and there's this conversation of what stories are we missing?
Right.
From people who never got a chance to tell their story. It just ended up as one paragraph in a newspaper that we're seeing in 1922.
What's Pauline's story?
Imagine if a person like that was able to tell that story about how 16 dudes, and they were one of the dudes who raised this kid, and it was the craziest thing they ever did.
Yes.
And it was 4 years of their life or whatever. And they still, they had a good or whatever. So... and you've talked about incorporating this with the library, giving them a way to where they can come on a podcast and just do their own, they just want to tell a story from their life.
Right.
One big thing that they felt that was impacted on them, and they want their kids to be able to learn about, it's like, if my great-great-grandfather had the opportunity to come to a library and record himself for an hour about his college life and what he wants people to remember about that, and like cool things that happened to him, we've done cool things that I'll look back in, in 3 or 4 decades. Right. And I'll be like, wow, wasn't that so cool? This is a big thing that I was a part of. And, people are going to be looking at that in the future. And I want my story to be able to be looking. Yeah, and it should be more than just a blurb. And, they should have to look for it. It's not that important to where it's going to be like, everybody, you have to see what Austin said before he died. Right?
Right.
But I want anyone who finds interest in story, anybody who looks up the Purdue Hockey Club.
Right.
Right. There should be stories about that archived away if you want to find out what was happening for Purdue Hockey Club or the Maine Children Raising Association.
Home Economics,
whatever this group was, right? If we're looking at this right now and we're going, what? This is crazy. I want to be able to find somebody who lived through that and hear their story.
Yes, exactly.
And I think that's a cool thing that you've spoken to me on in the past that I would love to see implemented in a way that we can store that information and share it to others.
But that's what we're trying to highlight here, is that there are so many good things and so many interesting
stories
and that never got told.
You only got the blurb in the paper, and we can only, we sat here at True Crime Week, we're just speculating, We're sitting here like, oh, well, obviously that was a murder. But imagine being able to go back and hear one of those people's stories from that case. And a lot of this stuff is happening today where we're finally being able to hear more stories. This advent of the internet and social media, we're finally being able to collect these things and organize them a bit more and hear the voices that were part of that. We're finally getting to the point where internet's been around long enough where people have died using the internet.
Yes.
You can find people who told their story on the internet and they are no longer with us, right?
Well, especially because of the pandemic.
Especially because of the pandemic and things like that. And it's really interesting to hear those stories. And those stories are only going to become more important as time passes.
Going forward.
So it's really interesting what we're doing here where we find these stories and all we can do is speculate and try to research and see what does exist.
And try to find that primary source.
And in a lot of cases, it's not easy.
No.
And we don't necessarily have all the time in the world to do that. But it's still really interesting when we find the blurb and are able to cover it.
Would you like to hear about the snake?
Is it a snake that's a monster living in a lake? What kind of snake are we talking about?
Well, I do have one of those stories today, but here's the headline. Has snake as pal in his prison cell. Now, If you found a snake in the prison cell, wouldn't you take it?
Yes.
That's not what
Yes.
happened. Would you like to hear what happened? When George Shaley was arrested on a charge of disorderly conduct, he managed to sneak a snake into the police station, though he was searched before being locked up. How well was he searched?
That makes me ask so many questions about where that snake was when he was searched.
Right?
The things I've heard about prison and people stashing objects, that is insane. That is a crazy proposition.
Within a few minutes after the iron doors clanged behind him, that's good writing right there, shrieks rent the air, and the desk sergeant and other officers found a half a dozen other prisoners climbing up the sides of their cells while the snake wiggled around on the floor. Absolutely.
This is so cool.
Prisoners climbing the walls.
I love the idea of like taking your snake to prison with you.
It should be more of a
Your
thing.
buddy snake. Yeah.
Your pal. Your pal.
Yeah.
At first, the prisoners believed the snake to be a vision created by moonshine whiskey.
That makes sense. Because that is way more likely to happen
Than
than
real
an
one?
actual snake getting into prison with you.
George was compelled to take the snake to bed with him and keep it in close confinement until the expiration of his sentence. They did not take the snake from him. He sleeps with his snake.
Everybody needs a friend.
He needs a support
Everybody
snake.
needs a friend. This is so cool. That's such a cool idea. I'm getting like this vision of like a prison escape movie where a guy and his snake, you know, the snake just goes anywhere because the bars can't hold him. So he's grabbing keys off guards, bringing it to the dude. You know, he's slipping through gaps, opening doors for him. This is cool. The only thing that's dumb about this story is it was disorderly conduct, so you know he got out within like a month. Imagine that guy's in there for life, and he's got a snake. It's just him and a snake versus
And you know,
the world
in prison,
trying to get
the
out of
snake
prison.
probably has plenty to eat.
You know,
all the rats.
That snake was top of the food chain. Prisoners don't mess around with snakes.
Nobody
Nobody
likes
wanted
snakes.
anything to do with that guy.
Oh my gosh. Hey, did you know that there was a way to beat the school attendance law that you didn't think about?
There was a school, so like, as in like, you go to jail if I don't go to school.
Yeah, and you have to go to school until you're 16.
Yeah. You can beat it?
You can beat
Well, like,
the law.
like homeschool? Like just poor homeschooling?
Oh no, there's actually a loophole in the law. Would you like to know?
What's the loophole? And when was this loophole discovered? Is this still 1922?
1922.
Okay.
Marriage is one way of
No
beating
way!
the new school attendance law that requires boys and girls to attend school until they are 16 years old.
Marriage is a way out of it. No! You're
Did you see his reaction?
You're talking about 15-year-olds. Stop.
A married person is not a
Please.
child, says Attorney General Lesh, regarding the meaning of the attendance law and an answer to a question as to whether a 15-year-old wife would have to go to school. The question was presented to the attorney by the state attendance officer.
It's so messed up.
There's a state
There's so
attendance officer
there's so
asking
much-
the attorney.
There's so much historical like situations where really young girls were married to really uncomfortably old men.
Very, very, very
And
strange
I
situation.
hate the implications of this story because you know they're talking about young girls who were married off at 13, 14, 15 to dudes who were 20 to 40.
So I
and
could.
it's so gross.
There's this
gross.
huge article about compulsory school attendance laws, and
Oh,
there's just this one part here that states that the maximum compulsory attendance age in 1934 was less than 16 in only 6 states, 16 years in 31 states, 17 in 6 states, and 18 in only 5 states. In 1914, 22 of the 42 states having those laws placed the maximum attendance age at less than 16 years old.
it's just so gross. It's all so gross because the historical context of the time period, what happened to women in this time
awful.
period, and the treatment of girls, these are girls.
Yes,
Right.
just little
Have
children.
you seen a 13? That is a child.
Child.
It's a child, and they're getting married. There's a reason that the age of consent is 18 in most places, and the lowest it is in anywhere in America is 16.
Mm-hmm.
You can't even consent to anything.
So back in the day,
And you're getting married at 15, 14,
as
13.
I researched this story, every state had a different law, as you heard in that little blurb right there. But you can stop working at 14.
What does that
At
mean?
14, I'm sorry, not working. You can stop. You can legally not go to school starting at the age of 14 if you're working. So when you started working for me at our business at 14,
Yeah.
I could have taken you out of school.
You could have. And this is like the whole argument behind this that these people make, and the reason that it's like this, the government's too big in your life, or like it's this oppressive government that's not allowing me to marry a 13-year-old and not allowing me to go to work at the age of 14. And it's like, there's a problem. If you think school is a problem at the age of 15, if you think that you know everything at 15, and the problem is there are smart kids at 15. The smart kids at 15 are not the ones getting married at 15. It is never. If you think the disparity in education, I was an 8th grader, freshman. You know, when I was in 8th grade, I was in the top class of 8th graders, right?
Yes.
I was smarter than the lowest 8th graders by a mile. Like, it's not even close.
And they still weren't getting married.
And those are the ones who, at this time period, were getting married. And
Isn't that crazy?
I don't need no education. I'll go work in the fields forever.
The men started working at 14,
wife.
got married at 15. That girl stopped going to school.
Oh, it's so gross.
And then that was the headline.
You know it was used. My wife shouldn't have to go to school. She's 13. She should be treating me right at home. Ah! It's so disgusting because you know that's why it was happening.
Yes.
You know that's why the argument was made. You know there were
had
creepy
families
dudes
of 20 kids
marrying 13-year-olds who wanted them to be out of school so they could be a home wife at the age of 13. It's so gross.
It's so wrong.
It's disgusting.
It's so wrong. So remember I told you I had another crazy horn story? Unearthed giant with horns. Now,
this sounds real. I'm thinking they found a real horned giant.
I looked. I cannot definitively say if this is true or false because I looked and there are lots of articles about things like this, but I could not find this exhibition in Helenwood, Tennessee that had any kind of credibility.
Are they saying that there is an exhibition in Tennessee of the actual thing?
So, petrified body found by Tennessee miners is 6 feet 4 inches long, and it has horns. In Knoxville, Tennessee, workmen of the Kenny Struck Coal Company at Helenwood, Scott County, have found buried in the earth and petrified a giant 6 feet 4 inches tall. Embedded in the one-time flesh about its neck is a beautiful chain. The fingers are perfect with long tapering nails. The hands are folded across the breast. On either side of its head are 2 horns, each about 4 inches in length. Its weight is about 450 pounds. It's on exhibition in Helenwood.
Yeah, I don't believe it. First of all, you called it a giant. It's 6'4". I realize 6'4" is tall for the time. I realize that, but there were still 6'4" individuals at that time. They just weren't common.
There's actually a picture of a horned skull. And it says this is not the one at Helenwood, but there is an actual picture of one.
This isn't the one we found, but it's one that an artist recreated.
I've read articles on both sides of this.
But,
there's a glimmer of...
I'm sure there was a diseased individual who grew horns for some strange reason.
We have people who have tails.
Again, I'm sure it happened, but the idea that
I
found this ancient race of giants and they all had horns, and this is proof. Sure, buddy. Sure, that's exactly what you found. It's not fake. I believe you. Especially in the 1920s, the era of absolute charlatans and snake oil salesmen who were trying to sell you anything and everything.
Conmen in the 20s? No.
You're right.
No.
You're right. I'm being too harsh.
No.
I'm being too harsh.
So, I will end with this last story because I think that this is one of those where it's family. It's all about family and what we do to each other.
Okay.
New York woman crosses continent to get revenge in Washington court.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm interested.
Okay. That's the headline. Without the flicker of an eyelash, devoid of all emotion, Miss Sadie Offerman attained the goal she had long set as that she had long sought as she sat in the Superior Court here and heard her brother, Sam Offerman, branded by a jury as a thief. It was her great moment, the time she had looked forward to for more than 2 years. As according to her story, she saved a part of her meager earnings in a New York garment factory to return to Tacoma, Washington, and prosecute her brother.
This is the biggest grudge ever.
Oh my gosh. Brother and sister, more than 2 years ago, were partners in a small garment factory in Tacoma. They quarreled, and Miss Offerman decided to go to New York. She was residing at her brother's house, so she packs all of her stuff up. And he decided to take her trunk to the station as she was leaving, okay? When she arrived in the East, which, New York, the trunk, instead of containing the clothing and other articles she said she packed in it, it was filled with cardboard, according to the jury.
Got him. Absolutely pranked.
He never thought that she would get the money to come back.
That's the insane part, because in any real world, you could just email a prosecutor in Washington and get it handled, right? But back then, you had to get there. See, she traveled all the way across the country. Really, she had nothing.
From Washington to New York.
Had to work for months to get the money to get all the way back just so she could prosecute her brother.
Yes.
Wow.
What do you think about that?
I mean, I would definitely see the ability to, like, you know, the grudge, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Why you're doing it, and the ability to do it.
But doesn't this come back to what it is that we're saying? That things were so much harder back then. If I was going to prosecute you, I had to really be ready.
You had to have that burning vengeance inside of you.
Yes. I mean, and so people were printing things in the paper that were just, scandalous to.
Yeah.
But that's what you did.
That's what you had to do. It was the only option. You know, nowadays you can go on social media and the 200 people that you care about will know, right?
Yes.
And, or you can send an email to a lawyer in Washington State.
There was no credit card to buy anything. Yeah. She had to earn it, live without all of her belongings.
Get all the way over there and then convince people and to have the confidence that she can get what's rightfully hers.
Yes. I love the tenacity of these people that we see in these papers.
I mean, if you got screwed over by imagine if Aaron did something like this to me. I can definitely feel the vengeance, right?
But would you work that hard?
I think I could be bitter enough. You know what I mean? I probably wouldn't have worked that hard without that. You know what I mean? This is what drove me. Why you want to work with us today? I have to go sue my brother. Across the country.
He is in Tacoma.
I'm gonna find him and I'm gonna sue him for everything he owns. That guy's like, I want this guy on the line. He's earning his bonus. I can tell that he wants to be here.
I researched this court case because I really wanted to, as we've talked about, I wanted to know more. I want to know
if he sued him.
Yes.
If he got the
I want to know what the judgment was, which is you in.
Yes.
I could find nothing. Because it's such a blip. It's such a little... But what's the primary source? These stories are just fantastical, and you just have to applaud these people. Yes. The guy got his snake; he got to keep his snake in jail. You just gotta applaud him.
Sue your sibling across the country.
Save your mom. After
bribe the entire city council.
I mean, it's all out there.
It's just an insane day of how life was in the early 1900s.
So we want to thank you all for having been watching. We appreciate all the views and all the likes and all the comments. It's been wonderful, and we hope you've enjoyed these stories as much as we have. And I don't think we're done. I think our producer's going to stay with us, and I think you and I are still not suing each other.
We are not going to sue each other. Unless this thing gets to be worth a lot of money, in which case
I'm
coming for everything.
So until next time, we're going.
Have a Merry Christmas.
Happy New Year.